Good, thanks.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. The time is now 2:05. I call to order the meeting of the Orange County Sewer District Number One Advisory Committee. A copy of the agenda for this meeting may be found on the county website under the tab for the legislature. Please silence your phones and electronic devices. And at this time, I ask you to please rise and join me in the pledge of allegiance.
Flag of the United States and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, happy spring, everyone.
Yes, happy spring.
Made it through that easy winter, so hopefully.
Chase me, Pete.
DPW is looking like. All right, first up on our meeting today is, on item one, we have Richard. Roll call.
Amo. Benelli.
Present.
Keeney.
Here.
Ellers.
Here.
Hotel.
Here. All right, great. You see, I'm so ready to die for everything. Sorry about that. We have on item number one, Rich Golden, the county attorney, Joe Mahoney, senior assistant county attorney, Eric Denenga, commissioner, Department of Public Works, Bob Gray, deputy commissioner, EF&S. And last but not least, Mary Beth Bianconi, partner, Delaware Engineering, UPC. And if I could call you all up to the front. Cheers.
We were just laughing at one of the environmental impacts of this project is going to be killing trees.
Hey, bud. I think we're getting there. There it is here again.
Sorry, I think it's everyone.
Hi, good.
Yeah. Take a picture of it.
Okay, we met back in January, and we were wrapping things up. And February, we took the month off, give a little breathing room, try to move things along a little bit more. And with that, if Mary Beth, you'd like to go into the final facility plan update and the final EIS update, that would be fantastic.
Lovely. I'm going to grab a prop over here. So what you have is the executive summary to the final facility plan. Here's the final facility plan.
Hey.
Yay. So this is, we have a couple copies of the document for staff to look at. You may recall that we had provided a facility plan back at the end of last year for review. We received comments on that, and we have a comment response letter here that is 32 pages long, and that is for staff to go through to see how those various comments were responded to in the final document. In essence, what you have, the executive summary, is very similar to what was presented here last fall. Not a lot has changed in that respect. A lot of these comments were super technical things about the project. So we can kind of quickly walk through what the recommendations and conclusions are of the facility plan, and then perhaps we can talk a little bit about BIS and schedule and variance and those kinds of things.
Mary Beth,
Yeah.
are you giving one of those to the legislature?
I only have 3 for today, but we can certainly, we were gonna provide it digitally. We thought that was an easier way to do it. We can also do it paper if you want. Do you want a paper copy? Paper copy. Paper? Yeah. Okay. How many copies would you like?
One is sufficient, yeah.
We can fight all over it.
So you could have one hard copy and one electronic copy.
Yes.
Yeah, digital.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, great.
Great.
So the conclusions are pretty much what they were you have an extra one for? The conclusions are what they were previously, really. The project is being driven by two things. One is the need to comply with regulatory requirements. And the other is demand. There's tremendous growth in the service area. Plant has served everyone really, really well since its inception. But there's the need to provide expanded capacity. So this summary is very similar to the one that you would have read at the end of last year. It does include information regarding the projected flows that were provided to us by the various communities is included in this summary. We also talk a little bit about the hydraulic analysis. We've discussed that the treatment plant is one aspect of this project, but that we have to be able to convey the water to the wastewater treatment plant. So the network of pipes that are owned by the county sewer district to convey that water to the plant also requires an upgrade. We are recommending that you upgrade at least the lower sewer interceptor, which is where all of the water eventually goes, with very little exception, to the maximum build out of the Harriman site. That project is going to be a large, complex project. You're putting very, very large pipes in the ground, will be extremely disruptive. And while you could potentially look at doing it in phases, it's likely to be much more costly and much more disruptive to, say, put in a pipe that would accommodate the increase from 6 to 9 MGD and then go back 5 or 10 years later and put in another pipe that would accommodate going from 9 MGD to 16 MGD or some other number. That would be a very expensive and very disruptive.
So we'd be looking at doing that right off the bat.
So we're recommending that you build the pipe, at least the lower interceptor, and there's that map that we had before where we really showed where these are. The lower interceptor is that big thick green line on the last page here. That's the one that a lot of the wastewater, not all of it, but the vast majority of the wastewater from the district as well as the service area travels. It's kind of the main, if you think about your body, it's like the main artery. And so we're saying upgrade the main artery for the future.
Okay.
That's our recommendation there.
Mary Beth. excuse
yeah.
me.
Have a question from legislature.
So this pipe would be sized to handle 16 MGD?
Probably well, so actually more than that.
Okay, because you
Right.
said the maximum of the site or the plant.
Right, so recall, so there's a couple things we have to think about. So we have the treatment capacity on the site. When we talk about these numbers, the 6, 9, 16, those are average day flows, right? The reality is that our system is not watertight. We wish it was, but most sewer systems are not. So we have peak hydraulic flows with these very, very large flows that go through the system when it rains, even on a daily basis. Whenever it gets in the morning, there's a lot more water used, that kind of thing. So the hydraulic analysis takes all of that into consideration and growth, right? So
Growth in what respect? Growth in the district or growth in the plant capacity that we can project at this point?
both, right? Both.
Well,
And so because we didn't assume that the service area is getting larger, we just assume that the service area that you have is going to continue to have growth within it, right? So it's based on the existing service area, but you still have a lot of places where you can have additional growth, whether that's growing up, whether that's, increasing intensity of uses, whether there's quite a few of the areas of the service area that have green space. So that was that analysis that we did. So we looked at existing hydraulic conditions. We looked at the effects of infiltration and inflow on the system. We looked at that projected growth of the service area. So that's the Orange County Sewer District as well as the served communities based on the projections that we had. And then we also did some work based on census information that we would traditionally do. And then on top of that, we said, okay, how big could you ever make the Harriman plant based on the things we know today? So remember that kind of in that plan of 6 to 9 to 16 to something bigger, the something bigger would involve changing train 3. That's that something bigger. That's that onwards and upwards towards 20 million. That's such a future thing that we don't really know what technologies would be available. We don't really know, but we've targeted this for peak hydraulic flow, which is going to capture whatever that average day is by a long shot. Does that make sense?
yes, yeah. And I guess the factor that I was thinking about was if technology changes so that it's more efficient in its use of space 20 or 30 years down the road, and we can fit more capacity on that site, how should it be accounted for in the design of the interceptor?
Yeah, I would say, it's interesting. So engineers are conservative people by their very nature. The original system that you have, the collection system you have now, was originally designed for 4 MGD and some portion for upgraded to 6 MGD, and it passes 30 MGD. So this analysis has at least those levels of conservatism on them. So I think you're good. As good as we can tell for right now for something that might happen 30 years from now.
A little anecdote. So an engineer was presented with a glass that was half full and was asked, is the glass half full or half empty? And the engineer's answer was, it's too big.
Twice the size.
Twice the size of the
City. Right, exactly.
And then just one question along the line of the interceptor. And maybe it's too early to even start thinking about this, but would it be better to have 2 pipes parallel than it would be to disrupt everything in order to put in one even
Yes.
larger pipe?
So that's gonna be, a design.
Okay,
right?
that's later one down.
Yeah, because, so part of this is, this is a hydraulic model based on best available information that we have, right? Part of this is gonna be going out and looking and seeing, where is the interceptor? Is it located within an easement? Is it in land that you own? Are there other encumbrances? Is there something right next door to it that you're gonna say, okay, if I'm gonna make this, because we're talking very large pipes, 54-inch pipes are enormous pipes. The excavation for that's huge. So, that's gonna end up being a design determination in terms of, how is this gonna be best accommodated? And it may not be that through the entire length of this, it's one solution. It may need to be flexible because you may encounter some circumstances where you simply can't accommodate the size pipe that you would like to put into the right of way, the physical space, bumping up against roads, possibly structures of buildings, different things. So that's gonna end up being a detailed design
Okay,
question. Yeah.
thank you.
We priced it based on the worst case scenario, which is that you're putting that enormous pipe everywhere. That would be the most expensive way to go. So the costs that you see, we price them based on sort of the, what's the most expensive way to do it, with the idea that in design, you'll come up with ways to, to reduce that cost and reduce sort of the disruption that putting an enormous pipe.
Thank you.
So that's in here. We did update the costs for reverse osmosis. The reverse osmosis system, which would be required if the variance for water quality standards for dissolved solids and chloride is not granted. And let's see. And I lost it. Here we go. It's on page 6. And it says if UF is ultrafiltration or reverse osmosis RO were to be required at the expanded capacity of 9 million gallons a day to comply with TDS and chloride limits. The estimated cost is a staggering $116.4 million in capital costs in 2025, with an annual electric cost of $250,000. An annual brine hauling and disposal cost of $25 million in the first year of operations.
I'll see 25.
25.
That would only go up.
And that would only go up. So it's a pretty compelling argument as to why that does not make sense. And the facility plan, and certainly the EIS we're going to talk about in a minute, goes into not only the monetary costs, but also the social and environmental costs of a project of that scale are really, staggering is the right word. They're truly staggering. So updated costs are fun. Findings of book 1 remain very similar to what you saw in the past. We do run through the different options here of how to get to a 9 million gallon a day plant. All of them do revolve essentially around the same thing, which is taking trains 1 and train 2, current train 1 and train 2, and turning them into a 7 MGD facility which when added to the existing train 3, which is your newest train, 2 MGD gets you a 9 MGD facility. We would also do the longevity improvements we've been talking about now for some time that would be associated with that to extend the useful life of the systems. We looked at, again, we've been through this a couple times, a number of different technologies that would meet your permit. At the end of the day, since meeting the permit has to also be considered, as legislative Cheney has pointed out, in the context of possibly needing to expand treatment in the future, there are really 2 currently available full-scale technologies that will allow you to do that. One of them is a membrane bioreactor. The other is a sequencing batch reactor. Those are both extended duration processes that will meet your current permit. And we've also taken into consideration when we were working with the DEC to discuss increased flows at this site. They mentioned that we would want to consider 2 other constituents that may be regulated in the future. One of them is phosphorus, and the other is nitrate. So we've, in the design, in the conceptual design, while those are not designed in because they're not requirements now, there's considerations that have been made for those treatment in the future.
Is one of the 2 technologies more amenable to treating those 2 than the other?
So phosphorus is generally removed through enhanced coagulation and settling, and that can be done through filters. So that's, if it's an SBR, you already have sand filters on the site, you would just be using your sand filters to do that. They're associated with train 3 with some upgrades. And the MBR process, you can remove the phosphorus through the filters there. So it's kind of 6 in one, half dozen on the other in that respect. The nutrient removal is really a function of the biological process. And again, kind of both of them will check the box. What you do see here is we do have some, we've included some cost analysis in here. This is on pages 14 and 15 of the executive summary. And we see that options to increase to 9, IFAS escalated, and by the way, we did use a pretty high inflation escalator here, 7%. Hopefully it's not that high, but we have been seeing really high inflation year over year. So that's looking in 2025 at around $118 million. The MLE process would be about $164 million. These are just capital costs. The MBR option would be 124.8, and the SBR 156. Going from 9 to 16. One of the points that I wanted to make is that you see there's no cost for IFAS or MLE because both of those processes use a lot of land and neither one of them will support increasing the size of the plant. So that's why they're not among the options that have been explored any further. The MBR, and these would be in addition, right? So you would take where you rest at 9, and then you would be adding 83 million or 86.3 million for the MBR and 94.4 million for the SBR, and that would get you a 16 million gallon a day plant. And then interestingly is the net present worth analysis, which again, we did that between the MBR and the SBR because those are the 2 technologies that can accommodate expansion. And while the membrane bioreactor plant the membrane bioreactor plant uses a lot more energy, but over time, it's a less expensive operation to run than the SBR because of the starting capital cost. Either one of them will meet your permit, and some of this boils down to the MBR is a very sophisticated system and to operate, and the sequencing batch reactors are more similar to the technologies that you have on site right now. So given that both meet your permit, they're very comparable in terms of cost. Both are equally as easy to expand. It's really, the technical staff has indicated a comfort level with the sequencing batch reactors. It's very good technology. So that is the recommendation is the expansion to 9 million gallons using the sequencing batch reactor. That's the same as it's been since we presented this originally. We do have the discussion of the regional approach. which folks will remember are ways to look at either eliminating some of the flow that goes into the Harriman plant and into the Ramapo River, either in part or entirely. And we looked at several different options to do that. We looked at decentralizing treatment with a plant on the Hudson River. We looked at decentralizing treatment with a plant on the Moodna. We have some cost metrics and some evaluations of how those could be done. As we've said for quite some time, the most cost-effective way to expand your plant is to use the one site that you have. Because all of your pipes go there, you already have this huge investment in that infrastructure. Just as a point of interest for the plant on the Moodna, a couple of pump stations would be required. You need about 10 acres or more of vacant land in the vicinity of the Moodna Creek, and it would be estimated to cost $151 million in 2025 for 3 MGD of capacity. A lot of that cost is because you need to repipe a lot of stuff. You're putting pipes in the ground. On the Hudson River option, very similar. This is a 9 MGD plant. You need about 18 acres of land. The cost is $340 million in 2025. That includes about 15.6 miles of force mains, several pump stations. It's an expensive proposition, but it's not. So the recommendations are to upgrade the plant to a 9 million gallon a day sequencing batch reactor, to upgrade the lower interceptor to accommodate the future flows. When you add those two costs together, we've assumed a 7% escalation out to 2025, and that's year on year. We come up with a capital project cost of about $200 million in 2025 to increase the plant's flow from 6 million gallons to 9 million gallons. We need a variance for the TDS and chloride, and we would upgrade the lower interceptor to accommodate current and future growth.
Any questions?
Yeah, I guess one of the concerns is what we don't know. And especially when you're going through costs relative to, what are energy costs going to be? What's the sensitivity of those types of increases on your net present worth analysis? Because that's a much bigger cost for the MBR than it is the SBRs, right?
The net present value, the MBR ends up being the bargain compared to the SBR, right?
Right, but MBR has a higher need for energy consumption. So therefore, if, what's the sensitivity to that changing differently than what you projected it to be on the net present worth values?
So we can, so you're pointing out something very, very important to understand. So we can certainly, the O&M, what we evaluated, there's a little star there, and this is on page 15 at the top of the box. It says labor, solids management, and chemical usage will generally be unchanged between the options. So when you think about what the cost of operating and maintaining one of these systems are, we think about people, we think about solids, what are you going to do with all of the solids that come off this plant? We think about chemicals, and we think about electrical costs. Since the two will be very comparable in terms of the human side of it, the amount of sludge we generated, and the chemical usage, we didn't try to get out our crystal ball and guess what those would be. We did consider electrical costs. And you can see that we also based the net present worth on a period of 30 years with a rate of return of 0.5%. Based on Office of Management and Budget Circular, that's the current standard that we use for this. On the electrical cost scenario, we can change that electrical cost to, it's a plug number, right? Right now, what we did was we put in what you pay for electricity today, and we ran it forward based on an escalation, a straight escalation. We can change that to whatever number anyone wants to see on both sides of the equation. What that's going to do is it's going to change both of them equally. right? Because the demand for power isn't gonna change regardless of the cost of power. So at the end of the day, it may not actually, the present worth O&M of 16.9 million for the MBR versus 7.8 million for the SBR. They're just gonna go up and down together as we change that electric cost, right? So we can certainly run, I know Anthony has brought this up a couple times because I gotta be honest, your current power rate is very good. It is extremely competitive. Many businesses and industries wish they were paying what you are paying. It is very competitive. But the reality of the world is it's gonna go up and down. They're both are gonna go up and down. If it's 9 cents a kilowatt hour on one side of the equation, it's 9 cents, it's connected horsepower, it's just gonna go up and down together. So yes, as power costs increase over time, that's definitely a sensitivity. But it's awfully difficult in one of these analyses to say, like, what would the effect of that be? Because in the math, they're just gonna try, excuse me, up and down together.
Okay, thank you.
Mary Beth, with this summary now, do you feel that we're ready to, it's ready for prime time for the final facility plan?
So we believe that we've addressed all the comments that were made, and we believe this document is a complete document. So we've talked for some time about the relationship between the facility plan, variance, and the environmental impact statement. So this is a good segue into that conversation. So with respect to the variance, we have, you recall last year, we did a bunch of water quality sampling, got the information back. It came with that giant book of all of the sampling. We are kind of in the very last end of getting that response to the comments that DEC had on the original variance application finished. There's sampling happening this week, right now. Additional sampling on the wastewater treatment plant that DEC requested. We have a couple of other small pieces of information to collect. And the sampling results, Tracy tells me, for the more basic things will be in about 10 days for some things, 2 to 3 weeks for other things. So about a month from now, we should have all of that material together, and then we're going to continue to work with Joe and staff to finalize the language of that response to the notice of incomplete application for the variance. So
That's addressing their concerns from previous communications.
right, if you remember, when we put in the original variance application, we put it in certainly being responsive to what's in the regulations that govern this. We also knew that we needed guidance from DEC to say, well, what should you want? What do you want samples on? What kind of information do you want? How are you handling this permit? So they wrote us back a notice of incomplete application, which we fully expected, providing us with guidance in terms of the type of information, the nature that they wanted back. Sampling was part of that. There's some information regarding the existing treatment plant that they wanted. So that's what we're responding to, giving them back what they asked for. We're just getting the very last pieces of information there. With that variance response completed, the intent will be that variance information goes in the draft environmental impact statement, which is basically ready and waiting that information. So now, right, exactly. So now DEC will have the variance for review. We'll have a draft environmental impact statement for this committee to then run through the legislative process to get to public comment. So we'll be getting feedback from the DEC, feedback from involved agencies, feedback from the public at the same time. They're kind of running on this parallel track. So that any responses that we would have to comments, whether we get them from the EPA, the DEC, the public, involved agencies, all come together and we respond to them in what's called a final environmental impact statement, which is essentially responses to all the questions on the draft environmental impact statement. Once we have accomplished that process, then the next step in the secret process is the issuance of a finding statement, which essentially summarizes the process that we've undergone, describes the environmental setting that we're doing the project in, what the potential impacts were that were identified, and then discusses the mitigation measures that are being offered to reduce those impacts as much as possible.
So the response to the DEC, we can expect that to be returned to them in a month,
Well, I would hope so. That's what we're striving for. You know,
more than a month, at least a month.
Well, we need the results.
yeah, we need those results back from the lab. And as Tracy, I double checked with her, she said probably the outside would be about 3 weeks. If the samples are being done this week, it's about 3 weeks from now, then obviously we need to get them and compile them, put them in the documents. So, you know, and then obviously it needs to go through staff review just to make sure that everything is, you know, complete and ready to go. And that will just be adding those last few pieces of information. So hopefully it's.
And then do you anticipate the DEC coming back with more?
I do, I'm gonna be really honest with you, I do. But what I think they're gonna come back with at this
Does that
point.
narrow down as you kind of get closer?
Exactly. The last time when we got their notice of incomplete application, we were looking for them to say, this is the data we want you to go acquire, right? So that was the whole, write the QAP, go do the almost 400 water samples, you know, all of that work, right? That was what we wanted them to tell us, is what do you want us to sample for? Now we have that information. We're gonna send all of that information. This is sort of the fundamental science side of this. Is gonna go back to them. Now, I would expect that they would get back to us and say, okay, now we have your data, we've reviewed your data. Now, for us to have firm ground on which to make a decision regarding issuing this variance, here's other pieces of information that can further support or bolster that argument that they may ask us for. But I wouldn't think that it would be any more fundamental science stuff. It won't be go sample this other thing.
Loose ends.
It will be more, right, because again, when the department issues a variance, when they issue the mercury variance, when they issue variances, they have to have really firm ground on which to do that. There's a reason someone thought that these constituents should be regulated in the first place. And you're essentially saying, the department is saying, there are other more compelling reasons why we're going to provide some degree of relief against meeting those standards. So there has to be a compelling justification. It has to be discussed in a manner and supported in a manner that's broadly accepted, not just among like we all kind of know what direction we want to go, but it's going to be reviewed, you know, by the public. It's going to be reviewed by our neighboring communities. It's going to be reviewed. I would think, you know, it's going to be reviewed by the EPA. It may be reviewed by others outside the state where similar situations are happening, because we do know from the research that increasing levels of total dissolved solids and chlorides are occurring across the United States, not just here.
Mary Beth, could
Yeah.
you kind of put that a little bit more context for the committee here with respect to that the DEC is looking at this for variance for us, but they're also looking at it with an eye for variances for others. And so that's part of the calculus of
Sure.
what they're doing.
Sure, yeah, so total dissolved solids is starting to show up in other permits across the region here. Not just here in Orange, but we've seen a few we're going to have one, we're very confident in Columbia, we have a couple in Green, we have some in Dutchess. There's the total dissolved solids is becoming a burgeoning issue. So broadly, the solutions, if there isn't a way to remove the total dissolved solids at the source, so if they're either just naturally occurring, Mother Nature put them there, or to the argument that we've had here is that it's a combination, Mother Nature put them there and human activity adds chloride through household use, through salting roads, through all of these other activities. This is going to be a statewide issue that, and the department is certainly looking for information that will support their decision-making statewide, as we're seeing this show up in other permits across the state.
So you're gonna watch out to set precedent.
Yeah, this is, variances are discretionary to a degree.
Definitely precedent setting. Anyone have any other questions? Michael?
Mary Beth, I guess when I heard everything, we're on target, I have no question, I think it is what it is, and it's gonna happen, what's gonna happen. it'd be helpful for me at least, and I don't know if this is something you've ever done before. You know, at a meeting, we were given the future dates for this committee, so the monthly, and I guess we could extend it into 24. And if I look at some of your things, you say, well, we'll try to get this by mid-23, we'll try to be working the design between 23 and 24. Is it possible to do a grid that gives us a best and worst case estimate of which month, what period, whether you do quarter, I don't care, just something we, as a layperson who don't understand, could say, okay, I see where we're going. Nobody's gonna hold you to it, understand that, at least I look at it, because I did it, and I said, well, if it's the right, then on April 18th, we're gonna be probably could be focused on the facility plan. And that could be something. And then you said maybe middle of 23, so would seeker be in June? I don't know that. I'm just writing these notes to myself, we begin design in September, what do we do? So somebody who knows what's going on, if everything happens the way we want it, it'll be here, if nothing happens the way we want it, it's gonna be here. At least we can feel it, that's what I'd like to
I
say.
think it's perfect time for.
I can definitely do that.
Any
Yes, we haven't done that.
Any cabinet you want, this is, I'm guessing. I
We can
understand that,
definitely do that.
I'm
That's
guessing, I don't know.
wonderful.
I'm not trying to hold you to anything, you know. Okay, thank you.
And the schedule actually brings up, the chairman asked me a question earlier, regarding, funding, right? So schedule also kind of plays into that, right? And I think Legislator Amos brought up an important, there's a lot of interaction, there's a lot of interplay between all the pieces and parts, and how do these things all blend together? So definitely update the schedule for the next meeting, absolutely, because we have not done that in a while. Funding. So, folks are probably hearing a lot about all kinds of money from all kinds of sources, right? So the big ones that we're looking at right now, the bipartisan infrastructure law, we call it Bill BIL, that was adopted in November of 2021. It's a 5-year program. It's
What was
trillions
that
of
called?
dollars.
Bipartisan?
Bipartisan infrastructure law, Bill BIL. Literally trillions of dollars. To the extent that your local airport got money, it was probably came from this legislation. It was infrastructure kind of writ large. But one of the things that program did do was add additional funding to the state revolving fund, which is something that New York State uses. It's the, I would say, the primary vehicle that the state uses to fund public infrastructure, water and sewer infrastructure across the state. So that's the SRF program, State Revolving Fund program. That funding is 5 years. We already have a year. They kind of gave you the money instead of a year, by the way, has already gone by, which is sort of interesting. So it's 4 years going forward. BIL funding is broadly for sewer projects. We can talk about this, is aimed at communities with economic need as well as environmental need. It provides 50% grant, 50% zero interest borrowing for a term up to 30 years. Presently, both in terms of water and sewer BIL funding that's currently happening right now, there are 44 projects in the state. We are doing 11 or 12 of those new programs. So it's always interesting to go through new programmatic stuff. We're working our way through that process right now.
BLI was 50% grant, 50%.
Percent zero interest loan for 30 years, up to 30 years. So it's a very, very good program. And it works well with, it can work with other funding sources. So to the extent that you have other grants, it can reduce, the borrowing portion can be reduced by other grants. So it's a very good opportunity. Yesterday, I was in the tiny village of Catskill. We have a CSO project going on there that's about $14 million. In the last 3 years, we got them $3.2 million in WIA, which is Water Infrastructure Improvement Act money. Talk about that one in a second. We also got them a $10 million water quality improvement grant, and then they got $7.5 million in grant under bill and $7.5 million in zero interest 30-year borrowing. And now if you do a little bit of math, you say, Mary Beth, that's way more than $14 million. What a great problem to have. So we're actually trying to figure out what to do about that. We have like $21 million.
Is that client, are they similar in size to this project?
It's a tiny little village. It's a
Tiny little village.
Tiny little village. Tiny little village.
So you can get us more.
But I guess the point is, this is real money that's happening right now. But I will say that we worked with Catskill for about 3 years to get all of the pieces and parts in place to get to that point where we can get all that money. So all of this, there was just an announcement recently by the Environmental Facilities Corporation regarding the Environmental Bond Act. So people may recall when you voted in November, there was a proposition question regarding an Environmental Bond Act. We hadn't had one in New York State since the Pataki administration. It was approved. So there's a ton of money in the Environmental Bond Act, and some of that money is going to come for water and sewer infrastructure. As is common with the state is going to use pre-existing programs to help distribute that money, which is great. Making up new programs is difficult. So same programs. It appears that a lot of that money will be channeled through 2 companion programs. I mentioned one of them a minute ago, the Water Infrastructure Improvement Act, or WIA, W-I-I-A. We have lots of acronyms. WIA, and then the companion program to that is something called IMG, Intermunicipal Grants. So both of those programs are very, very similar. They both provide grant funding to support water and sewer projects. The metrics absent the Bond Act have been fairly small awards. So for sewer, it was 25% of a project cost up to $5 million, and for water, it was 60% up to $3 million. The Bond Act is going to change some of those metrics to allow some additional funding to come into play. There's, if anybody's interested, public comment period on how they will roll out this funding is going on right now. It extends through April 14th. You can make comments on how the funding should be distributed, but that's yet another opportunity for us to look to see if we can receive some funds. Want to
So
specifically.
would you be making comments to that now for the public comment period, or is it too soon for that? Is that different funding?
It's programmatic, right? That's like, do you like the way they're doing the program, right? So
Would you
those
want a
are,
letter, should we send something that you,
we certainly
you
can,
recommend?
encouraging them to put as much money in the program as possible, right? And I guess also to not leave aside large systems. You know, there's a small systems, the cost of the pipe is the cost of the pipe. So a small system has to buy the same pipe that your enormous system buys. That small system is hard pressed to pay for because they just have very, very few people to pay for that same piece of pipe. So one of the things the programs have done a great job of is targeting small systems who have they really struggle to pay the bills. That on the flip side then kind of leaves big systems out when there's still need on the large system side of the fence as well. So that may be an appropriate comment to say is, you know, in terms of some of these things get capped out on population. Some of them evaluate the ability to pay. We're in a situation where we have a number of different municipalities coming together and using the same infrastructure. So what I was just going to mention is that the IMG program, the Intermunicipal Grant Program, is sort of tailor written for situations like ours, where one piece of infrastructure is being shared and used by others. Because that's something that the state wants to see you do. It's more efficient, right? It's easier to operate, it's easier to maintain, it's lower cost, less regulatory burden. So we may be a good applicant for the Intermunicipal Grant Program. In past, the IMG program has been a fairly small program. It's been capped out, and usually there's a half a dozen recipients a year. It's a really, really small program. So it's possible, and I'll look at this in a little more detail and communicate with you, but maybe encouraging that to be a more broad program to allow it to capture additional communities such as this community in this situation. In any regard, to apply for funding or anything, we have to have achieved some certain hurdles. So one thing is we got to have an engineering report, which we have, right?
Already back.
So we have an engineering report. Check the box. We need to get through the secret process, which we're in the process of right now with the environmental impact statement. We need to get through, and I know Attorney Mahoney's gone through this a number of times. There's a process we go through under county law. If we're going to borrow money for the improvement of the system, we have to go through a process there. So we need to, these are sort of all stack up for us in terms of activities for us to get to a point where we can then apply for really either whether it's municipal grants, water improvement, water infrastructure improvement money, The water quality improvement program, WQIP program that I mentioned was giving some funding to Catskill, is really focused on things like disinfection, which you already have. It's focused on combined sewers. May not be the best fit for this project, but we'll evaluate that. And there may be others. Certainly through, certainly bipartisan infrastructure law is an opportunity. That fortunately is not a separate application. That's through the state revolving fund, which was going to be kind of a portion of this project's financing anyway. So I think we're heading down that path. It's too early for us to apply at this point because we have to achieve these other objectives first. But we're certainly always on the lookout for sources of funding to help support this project.
I just want to back up for a second with that public comment period up to April 14th. It is.
I believe so, yeah.
I just want to ask the chairwoman and council, would that be something that we would, between Mary Beth and Betsy, we could put together something, whether it's from this advisory committee or from the fiscal services committee, or something from the entire legislature as a memorialization, recommending, kind of teeing it up for what we would be looking for down the road, and that we have a major, give a little history, and we have a major project coming up,
I mean, I would be willing to entertain something like that, but I need direction from you, Mary Beth, in that, how do we structure that? And is that going to help?
So very much like you may remember, we had that several months, we talked about the impaired water bodies list, the 303D list,
Yes.
right? That was, and the Rampo is listed as, for inclusion on that 303D list. And when the draft list came out, we worked together to prepare comments on that, to send that back to encourage including that. This would be a very similar kind of thing. So what the state has done is the Bond Act was passed. Now, the devil's in the details, right? The agencies have to figure out how to implement this funding. So what's happened is that the Environmental Facilities Corporation, who's sort of the state's environmental bankers, as it were, has come up with a set of draft guidelines for how they want to distribute the money that they've been given. So we would be commenting on those draft guidelines to encourage them to ensure that they're including broadening the funding for the intermunicipal grant program, which has been historically a very small program. And also making sure that they include consideration for situations like ours, where we have a sewer district, we have satellite communities, we have this environmental need, we have, economic activity happening, all of these kinds of things. So we really want to make sure that we're not being left aside to say, oh, well, that's a big county, they can take care of this themselves. We want to have a bite of this apple as well. So I think it would be encouraging them to ensure that the eligibility criteria for applying for a grant, now they can't say they're going to give us one, but encouraging them that the eligibility criteria can include situations such as Orange County's. That we don't get somehow capped out because they say, oh, if you pass this threshold, that doesn't apply to you, or you can't. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you. So I would ask that you take an idea from the committee as if they want to pursue this, and then we'll work with our technical people, because we're going to need some kind of assistance as far as that's
putting
concerned,
that together.
to put that together, just to put it in my hands and Betsy's hands.
Do
We're
we
not
need to,
necessarily the tech people
do we
here.
need to take a vote on the committee?
I don't
or
think you need, just take a
consensus?
consensus if.
Yeah, what does everyone think of this?
Yeah.
Michael, yes? Lori?
I can't see it damaging us in any way.
Okay, all right, so we'll do that, and then I'll.
So we'll coordinate with you, Mary Beth, and our people as well.
And what the best way to do it, whether it's from the committee, from fiscal services.
Well, there's also a time thing, because if this was gonna go on, I mean, it should really go to physical next week, and I don't know that we have time to do that.
Double check the, when it's actually closes.
Because I think, what did you say, April 15th, April 14th or 15th, and our session is on the 7th. So the timing, we may just have to do some kind of letter. don't
Yeah,
know.
I was gonna say, I don't know that, I mean,
It doesn't
they're gonna
really
look at
matter.
it factually, they're not gonna care how many signed it
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
necessarily,
it's just
so.
gonna have to be a letter,
It-
because
yeah,
to
From the
get it on, a-
advisory committee.
Friday, April
Or
14th.
from,
From the legislature,
it could
come
just
from the
be
chair.
me.
What do you think?
And And it's just a, it's,
We could do that.
Well, but we can also get the word out to all the municipalities and have them
Friday.
do it as well.
Send them a sample.
Yep.
I'll send you this.
I think that's the best way to do it, to try to get it on an agenda and go through all of this. That's gonna be
Yeah,
chaos.
yeah.
And again, it's, you're not, you're not making.
You're
a
welcome,
determination or anything. You're providing public comments on, so what this is this is the EFC and NASA's draft eligibility guidelines to advance Environmental Bond Act initiatives, investments. Public comments accepted until April 14th. They've announced proposed eligibility, $4.2 billion clean water, clean air, green jobs, Environmental Bond Act 2022. Draft criteria for clean water infrastructure projects. So this is our wastewater projects, a clean water project will assist municipalities in applying for funding for crucial projects. And we have the required quote from the chairperson. And then this talks about the guidelines. Disadvantaged communities will receive at least 35% of the benefit. Communities with PFAS is part of the focus. So I think, again, this would be a way to contribute to the to the decision-making, to say, make sure that we don't, that we also consider this as these types of projects as well, and these types of eligible applicants as well.
Thank you. And Gedalia, I just want to thank you for sending the information you sent yesterday to me and some of the others. And would you feel that you would be comfortable with getting on board with some type of letter from our communities? Barry, when you said it, you were thinking having the Moodna communities, the district communities, or just the district and just the Moodna, or
I would think all communities.
all communities? Yes, Gedalia.
Couple of small points. I understand that EFC's deadline is for an application is in June. That's when Marybeth needs to be submitting that engineer's report together with the application for funding. That gets us in the foot in the door. But I want to raise one point with Marybeth. Since the funding distribution and the point and score system, a lot of it is dependent on economics. Now, when a municipality comes in with an application, it's a entire municipality. It has census data to track from. What are the income levels? What is it? Is it disadvantaged? Is it not? This district is a bit unique because it bundles together multiple municipalities with different types of economic data. And if it's not pointed out, either by hiring a statistician or a demographic consultant to put together an overall of each of the municipalities that are benefiting from the system, what are each of the municipalities' income levels, growth levels, economic data, and then you see if we could build a case that this is some sort of economic disadvantaged community. Instead, if the application is going to be coming in like Orange County, they're going to be looking Orange County as a whole. Orange County as a whole may be a wealthy municipality, not eligible for some of the grant funding. So having like an a demographic analysis similar to what the county once before did with CGR, that type of analysis that you do with an entire district and evaluate incomes and other trends. So
And
that's
that would
that
be needed when we get down to the point when we actually would be ready to apply,
submit in
right?
June.
Yeah, so we,
In June,
If we're ready to
Yes.
apply.
So-
June, yeah.
so fortunately, we have demographers. So when we do these up, so we'll absolutely be doing that. The June, just to clarify, so June 16th is the date. And what that date is that's a date to submit engineering reports and what are called smart growth assessments. So that your project can be listed on the intended use plan for 2024. Which will start on October 1st, 2023, on what's called the annual list. So the SRF, the State Revolving Fund, has two lists. It has a multi-year list, which is the gee, maybe someday I'll do a project. there's the annual list. The annual list are people who have met those two criteria. They submitted an engineering report and they have submitted a smart growth assessment. And then to Dallas' point, they get scored. There's a scoring criteria. About 90% of that is based on environmental factors. 10% is based on whether or not you're a disadvantaged community. So when we submit those types of engineering reports, we always include, that's why we have a demographer on staff. We always include the demographics because the point's being made very well that it's not the entire county.
Yeah.
It's a very small section of the county. And to that point, it's 3 full villages, but then it's pieces and parts of other communities, right? It's only a portion of Chester, a portion of.
And then when they look at the
Not sure you
individual-
could include Moody. It may be for the application process, you only include the district.
Yeah, so we've dealt with these ones before, so they kind of do a blended thing, but we would obviously worked with that and also you
It
make
may
sure.
be better off not to include Moody.
Exactly, as long as they will permit you to do that. A lot of times what they'll do is to say, what's the proportional flow, you know, they might would do it on, we were just talking earlier about weighted averages, they might do it on a weighting basis. You know, those kinds of things, but when you have that listing, you get ranked, so you kind of know how competitive you are. You literally get a score, you got ranked, and you know how competitive you are among similarly situated communities across the state. So they compare you to others who have a similar population, similar, those kinds of things, as if they won't compare you to a tiny little village and they won't compare you to New York City. So you get that, and then that allows you to do a couple of things. One is you can go back and lobby for more points. You can say, we think you didn't give us enough points for this or that, or maybe you missed the boat on our demography and we really should get more points for our demography. So we can argue for points. But it also opens the opportunity for you to submit an application for financing after you have completed these other steps, which includes the county law process, getting through seeker, those kinds of things. So it's a multiple step process. I believe we already have a project for this listed already on the basis of an old engineering report, but we would need to update that. So we have to determine if meeting this June 16th date makes sense for this timeline, because it would be for the intended use plan that starts on October 1st of 2023. There's also more bites at the apple, which is nice. The June 16th date, we'll call it as the regular date. There are at least 2 more opportunities to also list projects. One would be when that WIA, Water Infrastructure Improvement Act, and in IMG program, you can list then as well. So it gives you a number of months more. There's a couple of other ways to kind of get in the system. But June 16th is one of the dates for this year for kind of taking baby steps towards financing.
Okay, I just have one more quick question, and then I'm gonna move along, because we have another meeting at 3:30 in here. Now, if you do the demographics and the different information from the different communities that are users, now, do they get put together, and can we use an average? So that if, you know, we have some small villages, town or so, a couple towns, that data can go together and then use an average for this Orange County Sewer District number 1.
So what if the past is an indicator of, you know, how they would treat this in the future with similar situations, because we do have a lot of these, actually. I know here it's unique in the county, but we do actually have a lot of these where we have sort of a one district, and then we have a bunch of satellites that feed in other places. It's a weighted average. So for instance, let's say the county sewer, 3 villages of the county sewer district, if they're 2/3 of the flow, then their median household incomes may be 2/3 of the contribution to the overall. So typically that is the way that they have done this, is based on proportionality. So that if you have a very high income community, but it's only 5% of the flow, it doesn't necessarily harm a lower income community that might be 50% of the flow or 60% of the flow. So that's in the past, that's been the way that the EFC has reviewed data.
I'll do one more quick question, Michael.
You know, I was thinking the same thing, why would you use a median other than, but your weighted average essentially tries to get at the median model.
It does, yeah.
I would have thought a median is a better way than a mean, because we can skew it one way. My last question is, Mr. Dr. Tony, your best guess at this very moment, do you think you plan to submit a proposal on June 16th? You think we're close? I mean, just the way you're looking at it, you can call tomorrow and say, I changed my mind, you can't do it for the following reason, but do you feel we're close enough and it's a reasonably good idea to try to do?
So for the June 16th, we would need to do two things. We would need to take this enormous engineering report, and which is not in the format that's required for this submission, and change it to that format, which is not that hard to do. There's way more information in here than is required. So it would be paring it back a lot. So we would need to do that, and we need to fill out a smart growth assessment, which is not challenging, it's a form that we fill out. We would need to get those things done, and that's pretty much what's required to make that submission. It's not a commitment, it's literally uploading something online and pushing a button. It's literally called a listing, and that's exactly what it is. It's to put your project in a giant list of other projects that might want financing. So if that's something that, we're directed to do, it's not hard to do, we can do it. It would be more, if we create a subset of the engineering report, can it get through your review and your review with all the same information, just narrowing it down to the project, without all the extra stuff that's in this, and then get that submission that could be done.
Mr. Chairman, I'm just saying that what you said is going to take a lot more input, because a lot more input. But I'm prepared to make a motion now from this committee that, as she talks to us, it's not the staff, but it's us, saying I would hope that she would want to submit something for the June 16th proposal, if it's appropriate. Just so that we're on the record of saying the committee, we want to move this fast.
I know, I
She could say,
understand,
why not take our-
but I think that, with our experts, I know that we're
We're the committee.
the committee,
We're not-
but we rely on our experts. So if they want to, if they think they can come in and get that done, and to narrow that down, the engineering portion, and if they feel comfortable, then I think
the
the committee-
resolution I was talking about, just to try to get something on the table, if you want to caveat it by saying, based on the assumption that the staff can meet all the data, all the requirements, that's fine. I'm just thinking, we're the committee that's going to be recommending this process.
Yeah.
Should we be on the record saying we'd like you to do it, if it's possible?
legislative.
What do you think? I don't know.
I feel that what Mr. Amo is suggesting is basically sending a message that if it's possible, within the time restraints and all of the restrictions and all of the requirements that you have to meet, we would prefer this to happen. Obviously, I don't want to put any one of you on the spot to say, okay, this is, but, get back to us and say if it's feasible, but take a look at it and see if it's in our best interest to move ahead with that, and just let us know. So I don't think you have a problem with, this is an advisory committee. So if there's a consensus amongst the members to have them take a serious look at this and come and see how reasonable it would be to move forward.
Okay, so we should.
I don't have a problem with just polling the members again.
And even if you made it without objection, I don't want to make it formal, just
Yeah,
let's make sure we get on the record on the tape. We won't.
I would love to see that try to happen if it fits the time schedule of our experts to move this along and to continue moving it. And I think we've made a lot of progress over the last several years. Made a lot of progress today alone. And I agree with that, Michael.
Eric has it.
Eric?
Yeah, one is I agree, if we can make it
No
happen.
objection to that. I want to make sure. I support you. Go ahead.
Yeah, certainly if we can make that happen, we want to pursue that. And logistically, do we need to come back to the legislature to get permission to submit that onto the list? Normally, we have to come back to get permission to accept grants.
Yeah.
We need to usually put applications in. I wonder if that's another step that requires us to go.
Depends on the subject, depends on.
Because
This is just a list.
the reason
We're on the list.
you're not, as Mary Beth said previously,
You're already on
it's
the
not a
list.
commitment when you are getting on this list. Why you need the grants, the authorization from the legislature is because there's a commitment there that you're making in the grant, that if the grant is awarded, you will accept it. So this would not need, in my opinion, it's also up to legislative council, but in my opinion, for the executive branch, there's no requirement for legislative authorization to go ahead and file this.
Okay, that certainly makes the timeline a little bit easier to meet as well. We don't have to,
Okay, legislative
another
change.
step.
Is there any downside relative to the timing of this? In other words, if we go this year, but we're not ready for a couple of years to really, qualify and be prepared to accept the funds and enter into a contract, does it matter?
No, so what will happen is, because this is just a listing, it'll get listed, it'll show up in the draft intended use plan over the summer. It'll be in the final intended use plan next year in the spring. Whoever the authorized person is going to be here at the county with an email address, they're going to get a notice that says, last year you listed a project. We see that you didn't apply. Do you want to stay on the list? Do you want to update your project? If you do nothing or you say no, it comes off the list. If you say, yes, I want to stay on the list, I'm willing to do the update, which is pretty minor update, it's schedule and cost, right? Then you basically just renew your listing.
Okay.
It is not uncommon. There are projects that get on the list and stay on the list for decades.
Yeah, I'd like to see
All right.
it, just so they start hearing our name. And,
Peter, would this be in addition to or in place of the April 14th, the sort of with the letter of intent that we discussed a
I
while
think
ago?
that would be in addition to it.
Yeah, so April 14th is just comments on the funding program.
Yeah, which is kind of like,
Short and sweet.
it was a letter of
That's all.
intention, we were gonna apply, right? Okay.
No, it's just kind of, they, you know, how like when they do rulemaking, they have to give you an opportunity to comment on what they want to do. So that's all this is they're just
All right,
saying,
I'm just asking a question.
yeah, I think the April 14th thing is just to get
Okay.
encouragement
And
out
say that they'd
there.
like to have bigger projects because.
It just says don't exclude us.
Don't exclude us,
Okay.
is
Don't
really,
exclude us.
because then also that helps when you are looking for money, you can say, hey, listen, we let you know, we were out here looking for money,
Exactly.
Okay,
Do you have consensus in the committee to do that? And that's what the chairwoman said. Do we have consensus? I'm the only one that said.
I
Yeah.
can
So what do we
say
think?
that.
Yes.
Les, Lori, Sarah, Katie.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
All right, with that, gonna move on. Mary Beth, do you have anything else to say about the executive summary? Or you did a fantastic job. I
Thank you
appreciate
very
it as
much.
always.
This is good.
Thank you. I'll just summarize my notes, just so I'm on the right schedule, the right page here. So for the April meeting, I'm gonna have an updated, schedule that's gonna kind of walk through going forward from where we are. We're going to draft something to support your consideration of submitting public comments on the EFC's, guidance for how they intend to use the recently adopted Environmental Bond Act funding. I'm gonna go back and talk to staff regarding shrinking the facility plan into what's called a preliminary engineering report, a PER, and a smart growth assessment, so that we can target a listing on June 16th, on or before June 16th. And we are continuing to work on finalizing the very last things for the variance, so that, within, hopefully it's within 4 weeks, but within 5 to 6 weeks, we have the variance response to the notice of incomplete application is ready for the county to consider submitting back to DC. That information can be embedded in the draft environmental impact statement, so that can come before this group for initial review, and then walk through that schedule.
You got it.
I would just say that based on our schedule, being that June deadline, a couple of other things that she mentioned may take precedence to get the variance.
That would be my only
With
concern, is I
Mary
want
Beth's
to make
office.
sure we're staying on track on the variance and getting that work
Yeah,
done,
yeah.
so that we're not
Definitely.
But with the end goal being to get all that
Dividing.
done by
dividing our attention.
Mary Beth, with respect to the SAFER and the DEIS, to make the determination that it's complete, adequate for public review, that will have to be done, go through the committees and then also by the legislature itself.
Correct, yes. So I think what we've talked about in the past is it would come here for review here. We'll take the scoping document, compare the scoping document, determine if everything that was intended to be in there is in there. This committee would then refer to physical services, who would then do conduct a similar review, would go to the legislature from physical services.
Well,
or-
that's, I think it might, given the timing of things, because things are supposed to come to the legislature at the beginning of the month, like the 10th of the month or something like that, it may have to come to this committee and the other committee simultaneously.
No. Yeah.
Otherwise, you'll lose a whole other month.
Right, physical services is the week after this one.
It's the Monday
It's the Monday after this.
So that would be the plan, would be here.
Does
physical
it have to go to
services the
anybody
following
else on
Monday.
the physical services? The other
Yes,
committee?
And then from physical services, which is the last, whatever this
Then it
Then
Monday,
it goes
through the-
then to
to the
legislature for the
legislature.
to the
second.
beginning of the next month for the legislative.
So we'll just have to line up the.
Great. Okay. All right, just to wrap things up, update on sampling process, we got a little more to do. Comments, sewer meters, update,
Sure.
Bob?
I'll be brief. 6 meters. Bids were received and came in at, we're working on a contract now with the low bidder. Total cost of $270,000, which is $40,000 for each meter and $5,000 for incidental costs. We're going to do the installation on these. The original 2 bids were in the range, if you recall, of around 2 million. The budget is 500,000. So we're getting the 6 meters at a cost of 270,000. That's the $40,000 a piece plus $5,000 for our incidentals for the Orange County Sewer District, the road crew guys to install.
Great.
There's also a service contract of 5 years. This also includes the monitoring. So for a cost of 210, so in round numbers, we're at 480,000. With a $500,000 budget, which is a lot better than 2 million.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
and worth the wait.
Service contract was 210.
Great job, guys, yeah.
Yeah, 7,000 each per meter, $7,000 a year
Per.
per meter. Okay, so that's 42 times 5.
We get the metrics off it all the time, whenever you're looking for numbers.
Yeah.
They're,
Yeah.
they're, the consultant's gonna get
Yeah,
rid of me or
Check them on the phone.
Yeah, great.
delivery. Hopefully it's not
Don't know yet.
8 months.
Don't know yet, but
Was there a requirement in the RFP for delivery?
I'd be guessing that. If I can let you know, but we're working on a contract right now with the bidder
Yeah.
to get it done.
Okay,
Thank
just 2 more quick things. We have the project, the new project over in the village of South Lemon Grove. I don't see the engineer here or any of the representatives, so we'll carry that over. And then our next meeting date is April 18th, 2023 at 2 p.m. Going forward, all meetings will be held on Tuesdays at 2 p.m. prior to the Human Services Committee meeting, which we need to get out of here for. And also Kelly was able to put together a list. This is for all our meetings going through December. And stay tuned, there might be some changes, deletions, whatever, but this is just another guideline to help us on our path. So with that, I appreciate everybody, I appreciate all the information from all of our experts. And with that, take a motion. Michael,
Aye.
all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Hi.
Unless you want to go next door. we could, no, I'm on.
You can't go anywhere.
You're on the next two committee. You can't go anywhere.
You're here for the
For
duration.
the day. All right, thank you, everybody. Great job.
It'd be interesting.
Very best.
I'm used to sitting